Everyone, it's time for the Striker Texas MLS podcast. We've got MLS matches again this weekend. We'll get into that at the back half of the show. We'll talk a little bit about FC Dallas, Houston Dynamo, and Austin FC returning to league play. We'll also talk about two of those three teams playing Liga MX opponents in friendlies. Should Austin fans be panicking about losing to Pachuca? Should Dynamo fans be celebrating in the streets after beating Atletico San Luis? One of the worst Liga MX teams. We'll talk about with Victor Araiza, a super fan of San Luis boys. And we'll also get into the dash, check in a little bit on NWSL, a league that did have league matches with Theo Lloyd Hughes, who's here. Theo, what's up, man? We don't get to see you too often, so it's good to have you. Oh, he's left. He's frozen. He said, I don't even want to be here. Well, I got Victor Araiza here,
this was the Striker NWSL podcast.
He's immediately out. Well, Victor, you're here. What's up, man? You went to that. That was your accent? I don't know about that, man. I'm not sure about that. Victor, you were at the. We want to start with the U.S. national team playing in Austin, but real quick, give us a little taste of what's to come when we talk Dynamo San Luis. Was it a good atmosphere?
It was okay. I think it was about what was expected. A bit under a couple thousand people out there, and it was a bit lively here and there. But yeah, especially for our San Antonio followers, we can get a little bit into San Luis and what they can expect tomorrow night.
We will do that as well. Let's start with the U.S. national team. They smoked Grenada on Friday night. Jesus Ferreira, an FC Dallas player, as you might recall, 4 goals. We call that a poker in Spanish, Victor, and 1 goal from Paul Arriola, who I wrote about on the Striker Texas. Was able to talk with him last week about how he gets a lot of hate from Twitter. He gets a lot of hate from U.S. national team fans. I talked to him about that. He told me he thinks it's a shame. He obviously doesn't like being the victim of people being mean online, and understandably
the guy
so.
People don't want on the team.
Yeah, but at the same time, I mean, look, like, it's the Nations League game against Grenada. This was never going to be an extreme challenge necessarily for the U.S. national team. They play El Salvador in San Salvador on tomorrow. That'll be, I think, a much tougher game. But Victor, look, like, there have been questions about both of these FC Dallas players. Paul Arriola, should he even be on the team? Jesus Ferreira, is he good enough at scoring goals to be the number 9? People are going to criticize either way because the competition isn't as stiff as maybe Uruguay or Morocco in the friendlies that they played, or the teams that they're going to play at the World Cup. But you can only play against the guys that are in front of you. And the FC Dallas boys certainly stood out in Austin Friday night.
Yeah, and I think I was listening to the broadcast in Spanish. I think former men's national team midfielder Marcelo Balboa said it the best, right? It's about getting Ferreira confidence. It's about getting a couple goals under him, getting him 4 in the national team shirt. It's not a bad deal. I think Theo mentioned it for us on social. There's just something about playing at that stadium for FC Dallas players.
Seven goals in a row now.
Yeah,
Dallas, 7 USA goals in Texas, all FC Dallas players.
Yeah, and I think, look, we've seen what they can do. Obviously, it's a bigger step in competition once it gets to the international level. I'm not talking about Grenada specifically, but getting Ferreira, getting Paul Arriola, in that sort of same groove with the national team, I think it's essentially what they want to do, right?
Yeah, no, I think so. I mean, first of all, quick note, it was remarkable to look at the field and look at the starting 11, not necessarily the traditional 11 for Berhalter, but half of the field players are either current FC Dallas players in the case of Ferreira and Arriola, or came through the system when you look at Kellen Acosta, when you look at Weston McKennie, and the other one on the field was Reggie Cannon. Then you have on the bench, Walker Zimmerman comes into the game. Well, he wasn't the FC Dallas Academy player, but he came through FC Dallas. I think that this dream that FC Dallas had of being the base of the U.S. national team is being realized, and that's something that does deserve to be kind of shouted out. Another thing that we'll be watching on the Striker Texas that you can check out is World Cup. The bid selection coming this week. We'll have all the updates there for you. I don't know how much we want to analyze that. I think we all stand our Texas cities. Like, we all think that the game should be in Dallas and Houston, but we'll have to see if FIFA agrees. Theo, whenever you were watching the game and we're mentioning the FC Dallas guys, what were you noticing about kind of the chemistry maybe that can come with having players who are current club teammates linking, as well as Ferreira and Arriola did in the attack, and some of the other guys who know each other well from the FC Dallas system as well, making those connections?
Yeah, it's funny you talk about it, and I immediately think of the great Spain team in 2008, 2012. in 2010, where you had all those FC Barcelona players, or a player like Fabregas, who ends up going back to Barcelona, but was playing at Arsenal at the time. But again, we're talking about education. We're talking about kind of understanding the same ideas. And actually, this is a bit of a sidebar, but it'll be interesting to see what happens in the Women's European Championships this summer. FC Barcelona Femenina, having a lot of players in that team. So one to watch if you want to see how kind of schooling a bunch of players goes. But yeah, I think it's about understanding, it's about patterns. And I think it's a second Ferreira goal where you see Ariela's through ball just kind of seamlessly find him. And it's those sort of things where you just think, okay, this team is really connected. It's not more hopeful vertical passes. It's not more kind of just the structure of Berhalter's game that's working. It's about two players finding each other in rhythm, and that just has a little bit more of an X factor. So I think it was huge. I think maybe when it comes to the other players like Reggie Cannon, or players with that history, maybe you don't see it as familiarity as two players who are currently playing on the same club. But I think it's got to be huge for players, maybe just understanding what each other have been through, maybe on more of a human level than a football level. Obviously, Weston McKennie has a huge football education at this point, but I'm sure he still remembers a lot from at the beginning. I wonder if there's other things we don't even know about that Greg is looking at in regards to football education on that team from other clubs that maybe tick the boxes. And he says, well, if you've played here or if you've played there, that's what I want to see.
Yeah, I think another note is that with Nico Esteves taking over FC Dallas, when I spoke with Paul Arriola, he said that was an enormous kind of boost, that he knows he's not going from one system to a radically different one with the national team, that he can play basically the same football every single time.
You can feed him the ideas week in, week out.
Yeah, he's really getting that.
Of course, Esteves knows Berhalter well, being his assistant.
Well, and I'm sure it doesn't hurt to have a word. Esteves traveled down to the Austin game to watch the game, to enjoy his club players, to see old friends like Berhalter, like assistant Luchi Gonzalez. So, it is all kind of one happy family singing from the same hymn sheet, at least when it works to the tune of 5 goals. One more note before we move on from this. Theo, go ahead.
I was just going to say, do you have an over-under on how many FC Dallas players will make the World Cup squad? Are we thinking, with any links at all, doesn't have to be current, but I'm saying, what, 7?
Chris Richards?
6.5?
Yeah, the thing is that guys who are not on the roster, I think you say Chris Richards is in the picture if he can be healthy, if he can be playing.
Pepe, maybe on the outside.
I think
now,
Pepe, I don't think he's even on the outside. I mean, if he scores a few goals at Augsburg, the depth at 9 is so shallow that I think that he could be right back in as well. Okay. So I think you set the over-under, if you're a Vegas odds maker, I think you set it at 6. And you probably push,
saying 7,
probably push or take
off.
the over. I mean,
yeah,
I think there's, and look, like when I was speaking to Paul Arriola, he's a guy who I wouldn't necessarily put his name in ink, but he feels confident that he's done enough. And why wouldn't you? I mean, he's the player of the month right now in Major League Soccer. Goals aren't even necessarily his game, and yet he's scoring goals for FC Dallas, now for the national team. This is one of the last opportunities for players to quote unquote impress, quote unquote stand out. I think Berhalter's analysis will and should go much deeper than that. But I mean, he's certainly stating his case. Jesus Ferreira is certainly stating his case. But there's no reason that Pepe couldn't state his case, that Chris Richards can't state his case. I do think you're looking at least 4, 5, 6 players. So I think it's a fun game. We can do a social graphic and see what the people think as well.
We'll be watching
people taking the over, the under, or if they push. Last thing I wanted to chat about this game, I was able to go to the game as a fan. Phil West was in the press box for us.
Always nice.
In Texas. Yeah, I was. My brother had a couple tickets to spare, so I took my son down to the game. Had a blast. Don't get on the terrace very often. Don't get in the supporters section very often. I was still repping CONCACAF. Still got love for the guys in Grenada. I kind of know a couple of guys on the staff, and so wasn't chanting USA USA. But
I was gonna say, when because your kid had a US jersey, right?
He was. Did you
scorn him a little? It's like, son, we don't celebrate US goals. We celebrate.
No. In fact, the celebration was what I think he enjoyed most. We were teaching him the art of the beer shower. In his case, it was the water shower. He soaked a guy in front of us pretty darn good. Because you're supposed to kind of spread the water out, but he just still learned. So. Yeah, I would say the gentleman perhaps was not extremely pleased, but it was a very hot night. Good atmosphere in
Depends
Austin.
how many times he's been to Q2 if he's used to it.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, there were some people sitting in the supporters section. They got, some dirty looks from the people who were singing and dancing and yelling. But for the most part, I think it was a good atmosphere when you compare it to what the U.S. has had during this kind of tour. Kansas City, another good atmosphere for a top friendly. But there was that discourse after Cincinnati, Christian Pulisic saying he wanted more Americans in the stands. I've been a little skeptical because I think the U.S. men's national team just played in Austin. They just played in Cincinnati. Why would people buy tickets to these games that are not maybe as enticing as some of the other games that can be on offer? But Austin did bring it. I think it's clearly on the map as a potential destination for more U.S. men's national team games, U.S. women's national teams games like they had last summer. So this is me as a Dallas resident applauding and taking my hat off to Austin.
Opening his arms.
Exactly. No, I mean, look, we all love the other Texas
here.
cities, even if we talk trash and think that Houston is terrible. Speaking of Houston, let's talk about the Dynamo. And Carlos is actually bringing us to our next point as well in the comments. Carlos says Austin brought it at the game against Pachuca, even when they were down 4-1. Victor, how much do we take from these Liga MX friendlies? Austin really struggled against Tuzos with a pretty good lineup. Tuzos, of course, the defending regular season Mexican champion. They ended up losing in the final to Atlas of Liga MX, but an extremely strong team. They're missing a couple guys for national team duty, but it seemed like they were just clicking early, and then the game after that kind of becomes a bit of a glorified training exercise. For the Dynamo, when you talk about the game against Atletico San Luis, how much are they taking from this? It's an opportunity that FC Dallas didn't take to stay in rhythm, to play a highly competitive game, and to get good minutes against really good players. What were the Dynamo kind of saying after their game against San Luis about the opportunity that a game like this provides? They obviously didn't have as many troubles and struggles as Austin did, but what do you take from a Liga MX?
But Houston actually had a handful of guys out for international play, right? So some of the top players, right, like Sebastian Ferreira, Carrasquilla, they weren't available for this game. That gave you the opportunity, which just, besides staying in form and getting a game in, right before the Orlando game, and Paulo Nagamura did mention that, playing a Liga MX team that has a lot of foreigners or South American type of flavor, Latin type of flavor would help them prepare for their next opponent, Orlando City. But yeah, just the fact that a lot of young players got minutes in this one, right? Maybe not a guy like Brooklyn Reigns that fans want to see more of because he just got in from Spain, I think the day before. But in defense, got to see a new face, Marcelo Palomino. Got to see some playing time, but really good playing time because he came in for Memo Rodriguez right in the 30th minute. You got to see Beto Avila get to more minutes, right, with the first team.
Texas's own.
Yeah. So I think from that perspective, this was an opportunity to show the head coach what you can do, right? How much you deserve to be on the field. The two Brazilians, right, on the right side of the field. Seca, the right back, Thiago, up top on the right. They got to get a little bit more time together. We saw them about once, and I think it was an Open Cup game. We hadn't seen them much. I think that was the plan, but we hadn't seen them much throughout some of these games. So those kinds of little things. We got to see line of five essentially in defense. So that's just different little things like that. Obviously for Austin it was a much tougher test because Pachuca's coming just a couple of weeks from that final, right?
And probably in better rhythm than San Luis, right?
Yeah, much more better rhythm.
They're missing three guys, I think, for the Mexico senior national team, a couple guys for the youth team, and Ibarra, who is with Ecuador. But for the most part, it's like these guys are in rhythm. I think it would. I don't remember who exactly they started, but it's like their typical center back pairing.
Yeah, but I mean, the four goals in the first half, De La Rosa, Ibanez, Cabral, Hernandez, right? I mean, those are guys, Ibanez especially. Yeah. I mean, that's essentially a pretty good team.
It's kind of crazy because it was literally 2 weeks ago, right? It was literally two weeks ago that they were playing in the Liga MX final at their absolute pinnacle, at their absolute maximum. I think they had a week off, but then it's back to preseason because Liga MX starts first week of July because they got to get it done before the World Cup. I know it's affecting leagues all over the world, but it's really, it's going to be brutal. These guys don't typically have a lot of rest. They are playing these friendlies during the week against MLS teams. Pachuca plays again tomorrow against Atlanta United on the turf. Like, I don't know. It seems brutal, but these guys seem to make it happen, and they're just always playing games. Theo, I want to bring you in as a watcher of an experienced watcher of international football. Friendlies like this, we're talking about the benefits that can be taken, where managers can try different things tactically, like Nagamura did. Also see different players, see new faces, a bit of a blend. I think for both Austin and Houston, of some of the veteran players, the experienced players, and some new faces, some guys who haven't gotten a lot of run, like Victor's saying. What do you take from a result? Like, should Austin be worried about a spillover? Because on the one hand, it's a friendly, we're just trying to get some run. We're trying some things out. Maybe they didn't work. On the other hand, you've been rolling along pretty good, and all of a sudden it's like, oh.
I think results mean nothing in this kind of thing. The only thing I would maybe say is when I was growing up and you'd get international teams coming to West London, if you did manage to get a scalp against, Celtic or AC Verona or these sort of clubs that would come over, it did always feel quite good as a fan. But at the end of the day, what happened in that game very, very rarely reflected what happened the next week. So I wouldn't take anything from the result. You talk about, the turf in Atlanta, like, make sure your players aren't getting injured. That's the most important thing. Yeah. See some patterns, try a back five. Like, as Victor said, I think those are the things you want to try and get out of the game. The result really means nothing. I think if, as Phil, who did a great report from Q2 on Saturday night, will say, you can look at the players, see how the 4-0 at halftime affected them. I know Wolf made a lot of changes and gave the other keeper some time as well, and was really kind of trying to give everyone minutes, which can be good and bad. I think, again, it can be a bit of a human thing, see how the players take it. But in regards to the result itself, I don't think it means anything. I think it's more about watching how individual players get affected by what happened, or how individual players shine in a new system. On the interesting thing of kind of international teams coming over, though, Victor, I did think it was interesting that San Luis and Dynamo seemed to do a lot of ambassadorial work, maybe more so than Austin and Pachuca. They had the press conference. But
that was the aspect of the charity
badge sharing. Yes. So why do you think that was? Because I didn't think we got that from Austin. It didn't seem like they were trying to get in bed with Pachuca as much as San Luis and Houston.
No, and that's a difference. Austin has been more proactive, I think, in getting some of these friendlies, right? We saw Tigres come into town.
Yeah, Tigres and Atlas have played there too. It's impressive, but I do agree with Theo that they haven't necessarily, I was just in Mexico for Bayer Leverkusen's quote-unquote tour. They played one game against Toluca, but those guys were doing, they were visiting orphanages, they were signing agreements together, they were doing all these different things. So I think,
and I think that's the feel that this Charity Cup has. It was a tradition that was sort of maybe brushed off to the side a little bit. In 2009 they stopped having it. I think part of it was the Champions League, right? Too many games at the beginning of the season, so they maybe just scrapped it. Then, obviously,
and that's
COVID.
Not a worry anymore for the Houston Dynamo. Nah, I'm just kidding. Right. I mean, it's true, but
not right now. Yeah,
it is. But yeah, I mean, obviously, the last 2 seasons, you couldn't really have a game like this. And I think, for the people that have been here a long time, to see this tradition come back a little bit, it was fun. The first one was that old Dynamo team facing Monterrey back in Robertson. That kind of, it was a little bit of a feisty match, so that kind of got the whole thing rolling. You had Bolton coming in, Valencia for the first game the first season at what's now PNC Stadium. So I think it's made for some good. It's gotten more Liga MX versus MLS matchups, but I think it does bring some international flavor, and it's good to see Houston. It really is the only chance for Houston to kind of get those matches in the schedule, as opposed to Austin, who's maybe been a little bit more proactive getting those in international breaks.
I'd love to see FC Dallas follow suit. They used to have the partnership with Tigres. Who out here remembers the Rio Grande Plate? Yeah, that's how old I am. And they had partnerships with other clubs too. We haven't really seen that, other than the Bayern Munich friendly, which FC Dallas doesn't really seem to. I don't think we're going to see FC Dallas
Bayern
friendly anytime soon at FC, at Toyota Stadium. But yeah, Carlos in the comments, he was at the game. He said, good vibe. It sounds like he was right there. Photographing the game on the sideline. We saw the Austin players getting frustrated, getting scored on.
That's
these guys are competitors in any game. Carlos, the one thing I wanted to know, and one thing I was missing at the US Grenada game, I said, if someone makes one, I will spend any amount of money on a half and half scarf. Was there a half and half Dynamo Atletico San Luis scarf? Because I mean, that's kind of the Victor Araiza neck.
There was not. I actually
that's disappointing.
Asked about that. I actually asked
the Araiza Derby
a couple weeks. I asked about that a couple weeks, maybe about a month before, and I think essentially they told me
that's enough
I
time
had
to make a scarf, right? Or at least to
Well,
cut two apart and stitch them together.
Yeah, I think essentially the idea was that I had to make them and sell them outside the stadium for them to be.
Sure.
So
Yeah,
I dropped the
and we
ball
did
on
need
that
you. Unfortunately, we needed you inside on the Striker Texas to write the recap. Fans of San Antonio FC who want to learn a little bit more about San Luis can read Victor's explainer, and this guy knows San Luis quite well. But we're giving him a bit of shtick because he's our Dynamo correspondent who also backs San Luis. So this really was the perfect game for him. I hope you had a good time, Victor. Let's talk a little bit about the Dash. We don't do this very often on the Striker Texas MLS podcast, and fans who are interested can, of course,
invite
check
the
out
other one weekend at the worst game in a while.
Yeah, maybe I'm a Dash hater. I don't know. You can put your conspiracy theories in the comments, but the thing is this. If fans want to go deeper, they always can on the Striker Texas by subscribing. Theo and our crew have good coverage of the Dash, also the Just a Dash podcast if you want to have 30 minutes of this instead of 4 or 5 minutes. But Theo, Victor's joking that this was kind of the worst time to do this segment. There are NWSL games right now. There are not MLS games right now. So we did want to take an opportunity. The Dash had been rolling along, and then it kind of hit a speed bump this weekend. Huh?
Yeah, they conceded 3 goals in 7 games leading up to yesterday, and then you concede 4 at once at home, which doesn't, I think the NWSL, for anyone who does watch it, is a very, very competitive league, arguably the most competitive league in the world, men's or women's, top to bottom. I mean, right now there's 3 points separating 6th place and last place. It's a really, really fascinating place to be. And I think what you do see is a lot of close games. And then sometimes these games get very lopsided. And 2 weeks ago, that was the Dash beating the Pride 5-0 at PNC Stadium. And then last night, it was the Dash kind of having the same thing happen to them. So I don't think it was rocket science. It was a little bit of bad luck. It was a little bit of Portland being very good. And that's often how these results go. I think it was a really interesting game because Sarah Loudon, who people may or may not know, took over as a caretaker manager after James Clarkson got suspended, has done a phenomenal job in kind of steering the ship. And this will be the first real test of adversity for her. And how she responds will be really interesting. She spoke after the game talking about being humbled, talking about it being a learning experience, but also saying, it's one game. Doesn't matter what scoreline was. All we missed out on was 3 points. So there's a little bit of reality check there. I think for those who watch the game and come at me with your own theories, I think one thing that might be worrying is the Dash gave away a penalty. There was no goal in the first minute. It's not a lot they could have done about that. I thought Katie Norton did her best to block it. Ends up in the back of the net. But the penalty that they gave away in the 22nd minute was a bit reckless. And then Shea Groom gets booked for making I can try and do it on video, sort of one of those at the ref. She sort of, I think there's actually a name for it in Liga MX. You know what I mean? Like a hand signal at the referee, and she gets booked for the yellow card. And after the match, Bri Vasali and Shea both were very frustrated with this when talking about the refereeing. And there is bad refereeing in the NWSL. But I actually thought the big decisions...
That's a change from most leagues in CONCACAF. I'm not familiar with poor officiating. I don't know.
There is bad officiating in this league, but yesterday I actually think the ref probably got the right decisions, the big decisions right. And so I think it was interesting to see the Dash kind of putting a lot of blame on the ref when in reality, they try and play it out from the back and they make an error. They give away a reckless penalty, they make an error. I think how they manage their emotions will be really interesting to see. It's a team that has managed their emotions very well. Like I said, it's just one game. They've done tremendous, but are we seeing cracks or is it a blip? Time will tell.
I want to ask Theo, unfortunately, the kind of when NWSL has broken through in the past 6 months or so, it's been because of coaches getting suspended, coaches getting fired. We just saw another situation in Orlando.
Amanda Cromwell, yeah.
Was it just last week? It just seems like this keeps happening and happening. That I think James Clarkson was kind of the last holdover from the start of last season who hadn't gotten the boot for either performance issues or off-field issues. He's currently under suspension. You mentioned the success that the Dash have had under the interim. What's the latest there? Are there any updates? Does the story move forward at all, or is this investigation still kind of ongoing and we'll know when we know?
We'll know when we'll know. Yeah, Jessica Berman, the commissioner of the NWSL, has said, we're going to do this right. We're not going to do this quick. So I would not expect anything. I think we're probably a few months away or maybe a month away, 4 to 6 weeks away from the Dash, trying to make things more permanent. It's important to mention that Sarah Loudon is the acting head coach of the Houston Dash. She is not the interim coach of the Houston Dash. She brings with her an amazing array of experience, very diverse resume, but I think she is someone who, when it comes to a long-term job, would maybe need more experience before getting the role, either as an interim or as a permanent coach. And she said that this week. She said, I'm waiting to hear what Jess O'Neill on the front office say. She is not necessarily trying to get that interim or the permanent head coaching role. And in regards to Clarkson, like I said, we don't really know, and it doesn't look like we're going to know anytime soon the way the investigation is going. So that being said, it kind of feels like maybe there will be another interim coming later on this summer.
That's interesting to have an acting coach that then becomes named in theory.
Right.
Someone gets named an interim, and then someone in theory gets the head job, Victor.
No, and I did want to bring this up because I don't want to pretend I follow the Dash too close, but I have followed them, relatively close from the years here. I do want to ask you, Theo, how do you think they handle the situation? Because James Clarkson never made the playoffs. In fact, no other prior coach had made the playoffs with the Dash. They just went, prior to this game, their best stretch ever, right? Their unbeaten stretch. They had, a hell of a result out there in Los Angeles, which you were out there for, right? An impressive draw in front of a great crowd. It seems like things are clicking here with Sarah Loudon. I know what she said. I've seen your reporting, but I do think it seems like this could be the coach that could take them to the next level. And like you mentioned, she's the acting head coach. It could be. I feel like the players, you can see a connection. You can see they've responded to her. So to kind of just, scrap this away and have James Clarkson come back, it seems like it would be an odd situation. Do you see it play out that way, or do you think the Dash would make a decision to maybe just part ways and start fresh with Loudon?
It's interesting. I think the players love Loudon, and I think Loudon, considering the circumstances, has done a phenomenal job. She's done a phenomenal job. Just look at the results in a normal case, but considering the circumstances, she's carried herself humbly, with honor, with respect, with tactical nous. I think she's really kind of ticked all the boxes. But it's 7 matches or 8 matches after yesterday now, and I think even she was quite sheepish to take the job in the first place. She says that when James Clarkson gets suspended on the Tuesday, she's offered the role as acting head coach on the Thursday. She gives it 24 hours. She takes a step back, talks to sort of what she calls her inner circle, which includes longtime University of Florida coach Becky Burley. And then she decided to take the acting head coach role. And she's 8 matches in now. Like I said, she's done a good job. But, maybe where she's at in her coaching career, she's still looking to maybe be an assistant coach for a little bit longer, maybe do another USSF pro badge and kind of move up the ladder. And I think there is a sense that this might be coming a little bit too quick. Like you said, she's got the connection. She's got the tactical now. She's got the skills. She seems an incredible people person, a real player's manager. But I get the feeling this isn't necessarily either something permanent or perhaps not even for the rest of the 2022 season. I could be wrong, but that's just sort of the noise I'm hearing right now.
Definitely the only podcast we've had where Nous comes up twice. Let's look ahead to the MLS weekend. Austin FC is headed to Montreal, as is our Chris Bils. That's why he's not on the show tonight. That would be, I don't know if we're going to call that one like the F1 Derby or something like that, but it's the Canadian Grand Prix this weekend. Of course, Austin, an F1 town. So I don't know if Bils is going to make it to the grandstand the day after. If so, I hope he wears sunscreen. But Austin FC headed to Montreal. The Houston Dynamo
out to Orlando,
frantically scrolling out to Orlando, and FC Dallas hosting the Vancouver Whitecaps. Let's start with the Dynamo Victor.
Double Canada matchup.
Yeah, it's double Canada. Well, but one is here. Let's start with the Dynamo Victor because they're the team that maybe has the most progress to make. Sitting in 7th place, a new face, not in the lineup this weekend, but we've known for a while that Hector Herrera would be on the roster.
Yeah, we hadn't even talked about it. He was here this week.
And he was here this week. I don't know, man. It's like we already...
Right.
I'm not... It wasn't a surprise. I expected him to turn up after they said he's going to turn up. It is news.
See him taking the Astros game, seeing some of the more promotional stuff starting to come out now, right? There's been a date set, the Texas Derby, July 9th, right? So that... And it's going to be the 50th Texas Derby. We talked about that earlier this season, so it's gonna add to that. And now you got 4 games to build up to to that moment, right? FC Dallas did a good job out there at Orlando a couple weeks ago. I think maybe Houston looks at their blueprint and how to attack them that way. I think it's another road test. We'll see how they take in this one. I do think their best result on the road was out in Florida, right? That win at Miami. I think well, not the best result. I take that back. That Los Angeles win was pretty big, but I think that LA win was helped by the Galaxy's lineup change a little bit. That does not take merit away. I think it's just another road test. We'll see how they handle this one, and I think that'll tell us a little bit more of how far they've come along, and especially bringing some of the international guys back.
Yeah, it's also about, I think for all three teams, and I'm looking specifically at Austin, it's about what you did during the international break and how you can make sure that either your momentum shifts or continues. In the case of FC Dallas, they've been fantastic. I don't know that they wanted the international break right now because they're in such good form. They're rolling along so hot. But Austin had that weird, big loss to the Galaxy just before this international break. And I don't know if they've been kind of stewing in that or if they've just been able to dump it and forget it. It's a bit of a weird spot, Theo, and then it's a tough road trip because it's a long trip. A good atmosphere in Montreal. I think, the fans have had some beef with the front office, rightfully so. Why did you change the name? But ultimately,
I was going to say, now they've got
now they changed the logo.
They
like a bit of a half compromise. I'm not even sure what's happening there. But a good town, great cultural town. It is a good road trip. If people are going up there, I'm jealous because, man, Montreal, amazing place. But decent soccer team. In a way, Theo, you could say this is another quote-unquote bonus game. It's a non-conference game on the road. But at the same time, I think it's important for Austin to sort of reestablish the tone that they had set at the start of the season.
Yeah, have they won a game since Wolf got that contract?
I'm not sure when that came. Their last win was against LAFC. That was midweek, the middle of May, the 2-1 victory on the road.
It feels like ever since they announced that contract, they've kind of struggled to really pick up those points. I think you've got to look at what the MLS does to its road teams, especially a bigger trip like that. I think they'll take a point. I'm often quite more defeatist than some Americans when it comes to what you can pick up on the road. I think a draw is always a valid thing to add to a tally.
It's because for you, a quote-unquote long road trip is a 2-hour train journey, man. And for us,
trying to go up from London to Middlesbrough, you still take that point, But yeah, I think if you're Austin, you definitely are very happy with the point here, even if it's not a great team coming off. I think sometimes with the big schedule, it feels great to be recharged and coming off after a break, but sometimes that builds up a lot of rust. I know Austin kind of came in with a bit of bad form there, but yeah, I think they definitely try and take the point, get back to maybe being a little bit sturdier at the back as well. I know they got shipped a lot against Galaxy, so maybe a 0-0 is not a bad result for Austin.
Yeah, that win at LAFC is the one victory that Josh Wolf has since that extension.
Yeah. And for FC Dallas, they have Vancouver in town. I think, like I mentioned, a team that they had a ton of momentum did FC Dallas rolling into this international break. They tried to sustain that. They actually rested pretty well, a full week off, and a lot of the guys went back to their native country. I'm going to do a piece or attempt to do a piece this week. See how the sausage is made if you made it this far into the podcast on Alan Velasco, who went to Argentina. His family came back with him. I think his adaptation has been good, not great. FC Dallas hasn't needed him to be great because of how good Jesus Ferreira and Paul Arriola have been, but neither of those guys are in training right now because they're both with the U.S. national team. So what exactly has it been like trying to make sure La Jolla, the 19-year-old who's never left Argentina before to work, I assume he's been on vacation or something, but this was his first time leaving the country to join a new team. He'd been at Independiente for a decade as a kid and then later as a full-time professional. So a big challenge that I think he's risen to meet, but at the same time still has some of those growing pains. So hopefully you'll be reading about that on the Striker Texas and how the team wants to get him involved tactically as well. Make sure he's not on Velasco Island out there sometimes as Arriola and Ferreira ping it back and forth and have great attacks. That'll be on the Striker Texas. Coverage of the Houston Dynamo will be on the Striker Texas. Coverage of Austin FC will be on the Striker Texas. Coverage of the Houston Dash will be on the Striker Texas. Our USL Championship recap for the weekend is up on the Striker Texas. All of it is over on the site. We hope you check it out. Subscribe. There's a 30-day free trial. You can dip your toe in, but then we think you'll jump in and take the splash. All on the Striker Texas. Your support there lets us do what we do here. Thanks to Carlos for hanging out in the comments area. As always, chilling on a Monday morning. We'll be back next week to recap these 3 games and look forward to the weekend right here, 10 a.m. maybe like 10:02, 10:03. We got to get set up on this YouTube channel on the Striker Texas. We'll talk to you guys next week.
Absolute pleasure, lads.
Maybe it should be
10:03. Let's make it a thing. I like
MLS kickoffs for our podcast.
Yeah. We'll start advertising 10 and then just have a pre-pod show. And then we'll get the ball rolling at 10:03. For Victor Araiza in Houston, for Theo Lloyd Hughes, our guest, much appreciated. We'll talk to you guys next week on the Striker Texas